Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "One's philosophy is not best expressed in words, it is expressed in the choices one makes. In the long run, we shape our lives and we shape ourselves. The process never ends until we die. Our lives are our choices." Our lives are our choices. Do we pay enough attention to the choices we are making every single day? Recently, I came upon an article about tourism in Canada that mentioned that up in the Canadian Northlands, they have a saying that there are only two seasons there, winter and July. And the article went on to mention that in that region in July, as the back roads begin to thaw, they become very muddy, and vehicles traveling through leave deep ruts. The ground then freezes hard again during the winter months, and these highway ruts become part of the traveling challenges. And for vehicles entering this undeveloped area during winter, there are signs that read, "Driver, please choose carefully which rut you drive in because you will be in it for the next 50 miles. This is what I'd like to talk about this morning, the choices we're making. Specifically, are we paying enough attention to the key choices that we're making every single day that decide the very path of our lives? Today we continue our look at famous biblical characters with the story of Cain and Abel, the sons of Adam and Eve. As last week we considered the first married couple, so this week it's on to their family, and we see a very dysfunctional family, a family consumed by injury, resentment, and sibling rivalry. Obviously some things are as old as time itself. It's the story of the first murder, the story of the results of violence and unchecked anger and hatred, and it's the story ultimately of a whole collection of lives destroyed by one person's actions. Now, as many scholars note, this text is one which, as with many of the earliest passages in the Bible, seem to generate almost more questions than answers. There's a lot of open-ended, unresolved stuff here. For instance, the mark of Cain. What was this? And was it a blessing or a curse? I mean, yes, it supposedly protected Cain from harm, but didn't it also then tie him forever to his crime? It's kind of like wearing a sign around your neck, "I am a murderer." Thanks a lot. And how about the murder itself that precedes this, particularly God's part in it? God seems to step back and allow this tremendous injustice to happen. What does this tell us about God's involvement in human affairs, or the lack thereof? Even further, most fundamentally, what about Cain and Abel themselves? Two sons being the only children of Adam and Eve. I mean, if they are the only family on earth and they're supposed to be fruitful and multiply, well, just ain't going to work this way, you know? Genesis chapters 2 and 3 seem to presume first and only human beings, while chapter 4 seems to suddenly presuppose the presence of other people. What gives? Subjects for many future sermons. A lot of unanswered questions here, but arguably the biggest question of them all in regards to the action of the drama itself. Why does God accept one brother's offering and not the other's? Understand, this is the premise of the whole scene, what sets the drama in motion and without which there is no drama. Cain and Abel each bring an offering of the fruits of their labor to God, and God accepts one but rejects the other. Why? Well, down through the centuries, scholars have sought to provide an answer to this question. They've attempted to make sense of God's actions here, particularly to sort of justify God's behavior. For example, some say Cain's offering wasn't accepted because Cain didn't bring it in the right spirit, that he only offered it because he saw his brother do so and that he didn't want to look bad. Others argue that the issue is that Cain was grudging and didn't offer his best, while Abel gave abundantly. Whatever, let us make no mistake, none of this is in the text. It is pure conjecture. It assumes facts, not in evidence. In point of fact, such arguments actually go against a plain reading of the text. As far as the passage is concerned, as far as we're told and we can see, each of the offerings appear to be equally acceptable. An offering of the fruit of the ground and an offering of the firstlings of the flock. Each is equally acceptable. That is not the problem. The problem is God's seemingly arbitrary acceptance of one and rejection of the other. As it says, "And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard." Period. That is, it's not that one deserved to be accepted and the other to be rejected. It's that God arbitrarily, inexplicably, almost capriciously accepts one and rejects the other. This is the real problem, as one scholar writes. Verses 3 through 5 set the story and define the plot. The worship of God is presumed. Both brothers do what is appropriate. Both bring their best. Both had reason to anticipate acceptance. There is nothing to indicate that God must discriminate and prefer one to the other. There is no hint of rivalry or hostility. This is simply a family at worship. The trouble comes not from Cain, but from God, the strange God of Israel. Inexplicably, God chooses. God accepts and rejects. Conventional interpretation is too hard on Cain and too easy on God. It is God who transforms a normal report into a life and death story for us and about us. Essential to the plot is the capricious freedom of God. Like the narrator, we must resist every effort to explain it. There is nothing here to suggest some ancient Western in which God prefers cowboys to farmers, meat to vegetables. There's nothing here to disqualify Cain. Many malign Cain and give reason for his rejection, thus introducing a moral dimension to the incident. But when they do so, they know more than the text. The rejection of Cain is not reason, but is a necessary premise for the story. God is free, and life is unfair. There is ample ground here for the deathly urges that move among us always. To put it another way, to really get into this text, you have to first you have to be willing to get angry with God. God is the problem here. That is, this is what really bugs us as the story opens, if we'll really listen to it. Not Cain's actions, but God's. But notice what this all expresses, what the text seeks to wrestle with and to explore, a fact that we all know far too well, that we live with every single day, and that is that life is unfair. I mean, argue this any way you like, dismiss it, avoid it, deny it, but it is a truth we all know deep within our being and that we experience every single day. Life is unfair. We see this all around us continually. One person is beautiful, talented, and intelligent. Another has barely two blessings to scrape together. One person does everything right, eating healthy, exercising, everything in moderation, still they die young, while another abuses their body and lives to ripe old age. Evil people prosper, the righteous suffer, life is unfair. It's kind of like the old saying, expecting life to be fair is like expecting a lion not to eat you because you are a vegetarian. It doesn't work that way, right? Life is not fair. This is the central premise of the text, and it's what it's all about, trying to get us to grapple with. The lesson being, that life is unfair, unjust, so why bother at all? It's all just pointless and meaningless? No. The creation stories demonstrate that creation, as God has designed it, consists of both great order, justice, rules, and laws, but also a certain disorder, a certain random quality, arbitrariness, unfairness even. God creates out of chaos, but leaves some of it there. In effect, Genesis 1 dealing with the order, and now Genesis 4 dealing with the chaos. And while this text doesn't specifically spell out exactly why there is the seeming arbitrariness to creation, notice what it does hint at. Two very different people bring two very different offerings. A rancher and a sodbuster. Curiously, these two are both born of the same parents, yet they're not the same people at all. Why? It's the random element of creation. It is the lack of strict order in creation that makes these two players who they are as unique individuals. And the same with us. We understand this, saying that in the science of genetics, a husband and wife have a baby. But the child is not simply some strict division of 50% of the characteristics of dad and 50% of the characteristics of mom. No, there's a little bit of dad, a little bit of mom, some stuff from ancestors far removed, plus some stuff that seems to come out of nowhere, right? That's uniquely the child's. And pushing this even further, it is this very uniqueness, the elements of our being which are ours alone, unlike anyone else, that we most cherish and that make us most alive. I mean, think about it. Yes, we all like having some connection to others, certain qualities in common, a certain sense of belonging and family. But it is ultimately our individual identity that we hold most dear and that makes our lives what they turn out to be. It makes life worth living. Remove this, nullify it, and we cease to be. We become instead some sort of identical cookie-cutter robots rather than human beings. The text, you see, hints in its very premise that a certain random elements of creation, a little bit of what we sometimes might call unfairness, is necessary to make us who we are, unique individuals, a quality that makes us most alive. However, with this, as the text also makes clear, comes a tremendous cost, namely the random elements of creation. That is, the lack of strict order that creates us as we are is also a quality inherent to all creation. And thus life often isn't and cannot be fair. This setting up the problem that life ultimately becomes continually about, namely, how on earth do we deal with this? How do we deal with this life of order, yet no order, of rules, yet no rules, of control, yet no control? Well, think about how it's played out in the text. Cain is angry and depressed because his offering has been rejected. The rules have been broken for no reason. So God comes and talks to him. Really, just poses a series of questions to him. First, God asks, "Why are you down?" It is a vaguely insulting question because God already knows why Cain is down. God is why Cain is down. Notice that God doesn't even wait for an answer, but instead just continues on. God asks, "If you do well, will you not be accepted?" Again, an insulting, now almost taunting question. Cain supposedly already has done well. He's brought his best, yet it has not been accepted. God seems to be picking at the wound, opening it and irritating it. Why? Is God trying to get Abel killed? I never liked the guy to begin with, right? Or is God just plain nasty? No. God is trying to push Cain, must push Cain. There's somewhere God must get him in this and get us. God adds one final tagline and leaves Cain there, arguably the pivotal moment of the whole scene. God says, "But if you do not do well, sin is lying at the door. Its desire is for you, and you must master it." Notice the point. It's not do well, as in, make a good offering, be a good person, and everything, go well for you. No. That's already been shot down. Rather it is, if things do not go well for you, evil is waiting to get you. It's waiting to destroy you. You must rise to the challenge. In other words, God is saying, Cain, you have a decision to make. Things haven't gone the way you like, haven't gone well, haven't gone fairly. It all seems downright lousy and wrong. But you want to know what? This is the very nature of creation, pal. You better learn how to live with it. You need to learn how to live with it. It may not be pleasant, but it's necessary to all of this being of any value at all. And thus you have a choice to make. Be defeated by it or master it. The choice is yours. This is the central issue here, choice. God's point to Cain here is that life is ultimately a choice. A continuous, endless series of choices. It's not just what happened or what didn't happen. It's not just an automatic do this and get that. Sometimes life works that way, sometimes it doesn't. But the real point is that no matter what, the choice is ours. The choice always comes down to us. Life is not simply the rules. It's what you choose when the rules don't apply. In effect, the text plays God's freedom of choice over against Cain's. The point being, as God is free to choose, so we are free to choose. And this is what truly creates us in the image of God. Makes us fully alive as God is fully alive. Great Christian author Oswald Chambers puts it this way. Our destiny is not determined for us, but by us. Man's free will is part of God's sovereign will. We have freedom to take which course we choose, if not freedom to determine the end of that choice. God makes clear what he desires, but we must choose. And the results of the choice is not the inevitableness of law, but the inevitableness of God. Of all creation, only man can say yes or no to God, and this alone is what truly makes us alive. We choose. The story of Cain and Abel is ultimately a story that seeks to teach us and drive deep within us the central issue of humanity, namely that our lives, finally, foremost, are created not by our circumstances, but by our choices every single day. A story that thus challenges us to ask ourselves, what choices are we making? Are we choosing well? Are we choosing life or are we choosing death? Cain's choice was wrong and deadly on a whole series of levels. He chose self over others, separation over connection, the moment over the long view. A whole series of wrong choices in that one choice. But drawing out of his example, I'd like to consider just a couple of particular key questions for us to think about in closing for our own choices every day. 3 questions to ask ourselves to keep us choosing life over death. First, am I choosing the easy or the difficult path? Cain's choice was deadly first because it was the decision that asked the least of him. Think about it. He chose what was easy and quick in the moment, not what would really demand something great of him, demand much of him to understand, maybe to grow, to forgive, to celebrate. He essentially just chose to blame another for his problems and to get rid of them, rather than face any real conflict within himself. His first tragic mistake, and notice, ironically, in choosing to have the least asked of him, it ultimately cost him the most. This is our first lesson here, that people who choose well are those who first choose what asks most of them, what pushes them and demands much of them in their relationships and their discipleship and the use of their gifts. As Jesus said, the road is easy and wide that leads to destruction, and many people find it. But the road is narrow and difficult that leads to life, and few find that. Many people wonder, they question, why and how God could push Cain into this crucial moment and then just leave him there to make his own decision and to act upon it at the cost of Abel's life. But understand, God was not just taunting Cain into murder. God's challenge to Cain was legit. Presumably God thought so highly of Cain, God saw greatness within him, that he could and would rise to what was best within him. It's a demonstration of what God sees and hopes in all of us. Sadly, Cain simply didn't choose to rise to this, and thus everything fell apart. How about us? There is a Native American proverb that says, people, like rivers, become crooked by choosing the path of least resistance. In our lives, are we more often taking the easy path of blame and avoidance and excuse, or the hard path of personal responsibility and repentance? What's this doing to us? I once read about this couple who, after 15 years of marriage, was having more than their fair share of arguments. Their marriage was on the rocks, and they wanted to try and fix things, and so they agreed upon an idea that the wife had. For 1 month, they planned to each drop slips of paper into what they called fault boxes. And each had a box, and these boxes would provide a place to collect and let the other person know about daily irritations, At the end of the month, they would exchange boxes and open the boxes and share what they had learned from each other. The wife was diligent in her efforts and in her approach in recording her husband's faults and annoyances, leaving the top off the jelly jar, wet towels on the shower floor, dirty socks not in the hamper, on and on, these same notes she left for her husband throughout the month. What she didn't know, however, was that her husband had been secretly checking the notes that she was putting in about him. Still another thing, I suppose, that would have irritated her. But anyway, in reading these notes, the husband came to discover how often he was being inconsiderate without even realizing it. The kind of things that hurt her that he didn't even know about. And it really got to him, and he resolved to change. When the end of the month came, they exchanged boxes and opened them. And the husband, of course, already knew what exactly was in his. Then the wife opened hers, and she began reading. And much to her surprise, every slip was the same. They each read, "I love you and I am so sorry. I love you and I am so sorry. I love you and I am so sorry." He chose to begin fixing his marriage by fixing himself. To keep yourself headed toward life, ask first, am I choosing the easy or the difficult path? From this then, secondly, am I choosing to act or simply react? In the text, consider what takes place. Something happens to Cain that he doesn't like. In response, he lashes out in anger. Essentially, he allows himself to be driven by the wrong in his life. He allows him to take control over him. He is driven by the events in his life rather than driving them. In effect, Cain does himself in, and his brother and whole family as well. Secondly, because he chooses to simply react to what happens to him, rather than stop and think things through and choose his own way, put himself in charge of the situation. He reacts instead of acts. Next lesson here. Victorious people in life don't just react to life, instinctively, almost uncontrollably respond to whatever life throws at them, whatever life tries to get them to do. Rather, they act. They choose what their life will be. They set the agenda. They choose their own course no matter what the events around them say or do. So often this is what happens to us. Events occur and we feel like this is the way that's set for us. We have no options. But the fact is that this is never true. We always have choices, specifically the choice to put events in charge of us or us in charge of events. To simply continually respond to life forever at its whim, or to take command, to choose what is right and to pursue it regardless. It's like Jesus said in the Golden Rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Not do unto others as they do to you. Or even worse, what's the old, do unto others and then run, right? But rather, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, as you would have, right? He's saying, take command. It has been said that all people can be divided into 3 categories. Those who make things happen, those who watch things happen, and those who wonder what happened. Once again, which are we? Christian author Christine Thomason writes, "My daughter came home from school the other day and showed me some candy a friend had given her. Your friend was very kind," I said to my daughter. Yes, my daughter replied. She gave me even more than these, but I gave some away. I inquired as to whom she had given them. My daughter answered, I gave them to a girl who's mean to me, who pushes me off the sidewalk as I walk home every day, who makes faces at me and calls me names. When I asked why on earth she had given her candy to such a rotten girl, was she frightened? Was she trying to win her over? Was she trying to bribe her into being nice or something? My daughter said, no, it was none of those things. It was just, well, she always makes me so angry and sad. But I decided I wasn't going to let her decide how things would be. Impressed, I asked my daughter, so how did it work out? My daughter replied, very well. She still pushed me off the sidewalk and called me names. But I like myself. Second question to be continually asking, am I choosing to act or react? And then third and finally, am I choosing to be blessed or to be a blessing? In the end, of course, what ultimately drives Cain's action here is that his brother receives a blessing from God, which he does not, and this bugs him, right? He is essentially annoyed by someone else receiving something good that he doesn't. And let's face it, have you never noticed how common this is in all of our lives? I mean, have you ever noticed how you can be very happy with everything you have until you see someone else who has something better? Even more, have you ever noticed how, in general, we are far more upset by the few who possess more than we are by the many who possess less? We want the blessings over others. And that's understandable, I guess. But notice what happens in the story when Cain pursues this. He loses everything. By seeking the blessing over his brother, he winds up with no blessing for himself. And I believe that's the final lesson for us here. When we seek the gifts of God for ourselves, we lose out. But if we seek them for someone else, we get them all. Simply put, if you want to be truly blessed, simply choose to bless someone else. Most especially, perhaps, that person you find hardest to do so. To keep yourself headed toward life, finally choose to be a blessing rather than to be blessed. Preacher Tony Campolo writes, there once was a businessman who was going through a terrible time in his life. Family problems, health troubles, losses. It seemed like God was totally against him. Everything was going wrong. Well, one day the man went to work as he did every day. However, this day as he got on in the elevator to ride the many floors up to his office in the skyscraper in which he worked, as he stood facing his own reflection in the mirrored walls of the elevator, he happened to look around and to see a room full of faces as seemingly gloomy and depressed as his own. And something suddenly came over him, and he desperately wanted to do something about this. But what? And then it came to him. He proceeded to turn around the elevator and face the others, and he said to them, we're all going to be traveling together for a little while, so what do you say we sing? Needless to say, the sea of gray suits facing him were not quite sure what to make of this bizarre request. They looked at him as if he had 3 heads. So the man didn't wait for their response. He just proceeded to begin a sing-along. His selection, you are my sunshine, my only sunshine. Long story short, when the elevator finally reached its destinations and the door opened, there were all these businessmen laughing and smiling and singing. Everyone felt great. And so did the man himself, because he chose to quit focusing on how God had seemed to fail him and to focus more on how he might be part of God's saving work for others. One's philosophy is not best expressed in words, it is expressed in the choices one makes. In the long run, we shape our lives and we shape ourselves. The process never ends until we die. Our lives are our choices. Our lives are our choices. The message of the story of Cain and Abel. This week, choose well. Choose life. Choose the difficult path. Choose to act and not react. And choose to be a blessing.